Hey everyone, my name's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel. A couple of announcements before we get started. So my previous upload schedule for my channel, and what I've stuck to for pretty much over a year now since I started Booktube, is releasing videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I've realized that upload schedule is aggressive and a little hard to maintain. So starting next week, I will be reducing the uploads to just every Monday and Thursday. And then if I have like a review video that I really want to go up, or maybe a mini wrap up or something like that, I will occasionally maybe upload a third video a week. I don't know which day that would fall on, but maybe there would be a bonus video every couple of weeks. But from now on, it's going to be just the 2 videos a week. Couple reasons why. One, time. It takes a lot of time out of my day to film, edit. So that's the first reason. Time. The second reason is running out of content ideas. And so I have a call for you all. If you want to see specific types of videos, or you have a video idea that you'd love to see from me, let me know in the comments down below. But I also just don't want to upload videos for the sake of uploading a video. I want all of my videos to actually have some sort of value that I'm adding. It's really hard to keep coming up with content ideas. So I think by reducing the uploads to just Monday and Thursday, I'll come out with more quality content and content that is actually going to be of value rather than just kind of recording videos for the sake of recording videos. Again, let me know in the comments down below what videos you all want to see from me. So today we are doing the Get to Know the Fantasy Reader tag. I thought this would be a fun tag to do because I am very much looking to continue reading adult fantasy as the primary genre on this channel, as well as sci-fi. So I haven't done this tag yet, and I will link the original creator of this tag down below. The first question is your fantasy origin story. What book kind of sparked your interest in fantasy? I'm not going to say Harry Potter here because I feel like that's just like an easy answer. Even before I read Harry Potter, when I was younger, I was so into the book Prophecy of the Stones by Flavia Boujour, I think that's the author's name. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I was obsessed with this book. I used to reread every chapter of this book, and I wanted to be in a movie adaptation of this book. I kept picturing myself as one of the main characters. I even started like a screenplay when I was really little of like what would be all the lines of the characters if this were a movie. I was so obsessed with this book. And then I looked it up on Goodreads a couple of days ago just to see what the ratings were. It is rated so poorly on Goodreads. And I bet if I went back and reread this book now, it would be a very different rating in my head. But man, as like a 7-year-old reading this book, I was so obsessed. So I think this is the book that I can think of that really sparked my love of fantasy. The second question is, if you could be the hero or heroine in a fantasy novel, who would be the author, and what's one trope you'd insist be in a story? Brandon Sanderson would be the author. I feel like I love his female characters that he writes. I just really love Vin. I really love Shallan. Even though she is a mess, we love her anyway. So I just really like the way he writes his females, and he treats his females pretty nicely in his fantasy books, much more than some of the other fantasy worlds I've read, where it would be hard to be a female in some of those worlds. Like Game of Thrones, I would not want to be a female in that world. So I would say Brandon Sanderson. And the one trope, like, I'm going to say 2 because I can't just limit it to one. I want a talking sword. Like, I want the talking sword from Moorbreaker. I want Nightblood. So just like any inanimate object, like Foundry Side has an inanimate object, like sidekick companion. I want that. So whatever shape that would take, preferably like a sword, that would be awesome. And then the wise mentor wizard. I want a Gandalf helping me out with things. That would be my ideal. So I think I have to say inanimate object trope I really want in there. And then I really want the wise mentor figure in there as well. If he's a wizard, great. What is a fantasy you've read this year that you want more people to read? I'm not going to say Foundry Side. I'm not going to say Foundry Side. Okay, let me try to think of something that's not Foundry Side. I'm going to go with what I think is probably the most underrated book series I've read so far this year. And it's not like my favorite, but it's still so amazing, and more people need to talk about this series, and that is the whole Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden, starting with The Bear and the Nightingale, The Girl in the Tower, and The Winter of the Witch. So I love this series. Actually, the first book in this series is my least favorite. I just think it gets better and better as it goes on, because the first book is very slow, it's very character driven, but it's very beautiful. It almost reads like a fairy tale. And then you get to the second book and it just crazy stakes, so much action, so much fun. And then the third book is just epic awesomeness, and I love this series. I know that it's not the most underrated. I've seen a lot of people talk about it and love on it, so it's not super underrated, but I think it's the least talked about of the fantasy books that I've loved this year. The next question is, what is your favorite fantasy subgenre? And then what subgenre have you not read much from? So I think my favorite fantasy subgenre, can I say grimdark? Is that considered a subgenre? Whatever that is, I really like dark fantasy stories that are a little messed up and that have really dark, morally gray characters. So if that's grimdark, awesome. I don't know if that's a subgenre or not, but I'm gonna say that. And then what subgenre have you not read much from? I'm gonna say steampunk. I'm in love with the idea of steampunk. Like, that idea to me just sounds so cool, but I've yet to read a book that has made me love steampunk. So I think I just need to read more from the genre to really fall in love with it. So I would say steampunk here. What is one of your auto-buy fantasy authors? I've already talked about Brandon Sanderson, so I'm not going to say that. I'm going to go with Brent Weeks here. I have only read The Black Prism, and I'm currently reading The Blinding Knife, which I'm loving. But that is enough to inform me that I love his writing style. It is so accessible. It has this humor in it that just works for me. I love the way he writes characters, and I think I would really love anything written by him. I really want to read all of the Brent Weeks things. Like, definitely want to pick up his Night Angel trilogy, I believe is the other one that's very popular. So that one will be my next series that I start after I finish Lightbringer. How do you typically find fantasy recommendations? Booktube and Goodreads. I would say a combination of just watching a lot of fantasy booktubers. Most notably, I think Daniel Greene, everyone knows. Elliot Brooks, everyone probably knows. If you don't, please go follow Elliot. Merphy, she's great. But then some of the smaller booktubers that I've recently discovered and I'm loving their recommendations would include Brightness Katy Reads with Kesara, The Nerdy Narrative, Alex Nieves. There's a lot more that I could probably list. So I'm gonna link them all down below if you're looking for some more fantasy recommendations. My TBR at this point is exploding with fantasy books, so I don't feel like I need to accumulate any more recommendations at this time. I just really need to read the ones that I've been wanting to read. But when I do look for recommendations, I usually go to Booktube and those channels, or I go to Goodreads. What is an upcoming fantasy release you are excited for? So besides Rhythm of War, besides the obvious, to be honest with you, I want to change this question to what is the backlist fantasy book that I'm most excited to get to, because I think that I have more backlist fantasy books than I have anticipated release fantasy books. So I'm cheating, and I'm just going to change the question to suit my needs. So now that that is the question, I'm going to say The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. I have not seen one review less than 5 stars. I'm going to say The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I have seen mixed reviews for this one, so I'm very curious to see what my own thoughts will be. I'm going to say The Ryaria. I still can't say that word, you guys. The Theft of Swords, this bind-up of the first 2 books in this Michael J. Sullivan series. I've been really looking forward to this. I've heard it's very similar to Kings of the Wild, maybe even better. So we will see. I'm very excited. This one, maybe Save the best for last, maybe. The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin, and just all of the N.K. Jemisin books. So those are the backlist fantasy books that I haven't read yet that I am extremely excited for. What is one misconception about fantasy you would like to lay to rest? I think a lot of the misconceptions about fantasy have already been addressed for the most part, and a lot of it has been fixed, but I would say that it's not for women. That's obviously false. I mean, I think we're way past that point now where there are tons and tons of not only women writers of fantasy that are now being boosted up, but women readers as well. So I think that misconception is for the most part gone. And then that fantasy doesn't take on hard-hitting subjects, or you're not a real reader if you read fantasy. I think that stuff is for the most part addressed and hopefully gone, because as we've seen with so many recent fantasy books especially, I mean, they're getting deep. They're getting deep, y'all. I especially have heard a lot of that talk surrounding the Poppy War and how it really, really sheds a light on the realities of war, because it's based off of historical events. And so I think we're just seeing more of that. So I think that misconception is pretty much gone as well. If they aren't laid to rest, obviously those two. This one's interesting. So for new fantasy readers or readers who are looking to get into that genre, recommend the first 3 books as a place to start. Still not going to say Foundryside. I'm still not going to say Foundryside. If you're wondering why I'm not saying Foundryside for any of these, it's because I've literally talked about that book in every single one of my videos. So I'm not saying Foundryside, but I still recommend you check it out. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of combine the first 2 because, again, I'm just cheating at all of these questions. So these 2 by Brandon Sanderson, I would say you can start with either Warbreaker or The Final Empire, which is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. Either of these 2, I think, is not only an amazing place to start for Sanderson, but it's also just an amazing place to start for fantasy. I would say Mistborn, if the idea of allomancy and magic by metals interests you, and more of like a ragtag group of outcasts trying to overthrow the ruler sounds like it's your jam, then go with this one. But if Warbreaker, a story more about sisters and a relationship between sisters and a relationship between humans and gods, sounds more interesting, and a little bit of romance sounds more interesting, then I would go with Warbreaker. So it just depends on which one piques your interest, but read both. Let's be real, just read both. And then I would also actually say Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames, because I have heard a lot of people say that they are not fantasy readers and they really enjoyed this. And that's actually kind of surprising to me, because I wouldn't think of this book as one that is a good starter into the fantasy genre, but a lot of people have said it is. So maybe I'm just crazy. I want to still recommend Kings of the Wild because apparently there are people out there who find this as an awesome start. If you love classic rock and the idea of a fantasy world and characters heavily inspired by rock bands, then I really think you would love this, because there's so many references to rock and just bands, and it's really, really unique and well done, and there's a ton of humor to be enjoyed. So if you like your fantasy books that don't take themselves too seriously, I would say Kings of the Wild. It doesn't go too deep, it's just enjoyable. And then my last one, it's not like high fantasy, which is why I want to recommend it, and I think it's kind of a blend. It's one of those where you don't know if it's fantasy or sci-fi really, and that's Vicious by Ve Schwab, one of my favorite books. This one is like X-Men, but in a fantasy world, and if the X-Men were super morally gray, where they're almost villains, and you don't know if you should be rooting for them or not. Vicious is awesome. I love it because of the characters. I think the character work is some of my favorite ever. I love these characters so much, even if I'm not supposed to love them. I love them. If you like morally gray characters, this is your book. And the last question, what are the most recent fantasy reading content creators you have come across that you'd like to shout out. Oh my god, I just did this in the earlier question. I'm just gonna leave a whole list down below for you all to check out if you want to. So that is the Get to Know the Fantasy Reader tag. I am going to tag some of my newer favorites. I'm gonna tag Brightness Katy Reads. I don't know if you've done this tag yet, Katy, but if you haven't, you're tagged. I'm also gonna tag The Nerdy Narrative. You might have done this tag. If you have, link it, because I would love to see it. And then I'm also going to tag someone who's in my book club, and that's Bookswithv. I want to see this tag from you, V, if you haven't done it already. So those are the 3 people I will tag for now. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. What is your favorite fantasy book of all time? Leave that comment down below. I would love to know, and I'd love to just continue to stack books on my TBR because it's not like it's exploding or anything. Nah, not at all. Thank you again so much for watching. I will see you all next week, Monday and Thursday. So until next time, bye!